The cemetery was quiet in a way that felt heavy, not peaceful. The kind of quiet that presses against the chest and makes breathing feel slower. Tall trees stood still, their leaves barely moving. The morning air was cool and the sky was pale, as if the day itself was unsure how much light it wanted to give. A black car rolled to a stop near the entrance. The engine shut off, and for a moment nothing happened. Then the driver's door opened, and a man stepped out. He moved carefully, like someone trying not to disturb the space around him. His clothes were a simple dark coat, plain shoes, no signs of wealth, but there was a weight about him that went beyond clothing. It sat in his shoulders, in the way his eyes did not rush ahead but stayed low, fixed on the ground. People in other places knew his face. They knew his name. They knew the money, the power, the headlines. Here, none of that mattered. The cemetery did not care who he was. Death never did. He closed the car door quietly and stood still for a few seconds, as if gathering strength. Then he picked up a small bundle of fresh white flowers from the back seat. He did not check his phone. He did not look around to see if anyone recognized him. He walked forward alone, following a path he had taken many times before. Each step felt familiar and painful at the same time. The paths were clean, the stones arranged in neat lines, names carved into them like whispers frozen in time. Some graves were decorated with colors and toys. Others had nothing but grass and stone. He passed them all without really seeing them. When he reached the grave he was looking for, he stopped. The stone was simple. No shining marble. No long words. Just a name, 2 dates, and a short line that said more than any speech ever could. He stared at it, his eyes slowly tracing each letter, even though he already knew them by heart. He had read them hundreds of times. He bent down and carefully placed the flowers at the base of the stone. His hands trembled slightly. He noticed it, and for a brief moment, anger flashed through him. Not anger at the shaking, but at the fact that after all these years, his body still reacted this way, as if grief had a memory of its own. "I came early today," he said softly, his voice barely louder than the wind. "I needed the quiet." There was no response. There never was. He straightened up and looked around. The cemetery was not completely empty. A few people stood in the distance, lost in their own worlds of memory and loss. Near a small tree, a woman was kneeling by a grave. From where he stood, he could see her shoulders shaking. She kept wiping her face, but it did nothing to stop the tears. He looked away, feeling like an uninvited guest in someone else's pain. But something about her pulled his attention back. Not curiosity. Recognition. He knew that posture. The way grief bends the body forward, as if it's too heavy to carry upright. He had stood that way himself once. Had knelt that way too, when the pain was still new and sharp enough to take. His breath away, he turned back to his own grave and lowered himself onto the grass. He did not care if his coat got dirty. None of that mattered here. "I remember the day everything changed," he continued quietly. "I was late again. Always late. I thought I had more time." His throat tightened. He paused, pressing his lips together until the feeling passed. Talking like this was not easy, even now. Especially now. All the meetings, all the calls, all the plans for later. "I thought I was building something important. I didn't know what it would cost." The wind moved through the trees, brushing against his face like a gentle hand. He closed his eyes for a second, letting the sound fill the silence. From across the cemetery came a soft voice. The woman near the tree was speaking. He couldn't hear the words clearly, but the tone cut through him. It was the sound of someone begging, not for anything new, but for something that could never come back. He opened his eyes again. The woman looked tired. Her clothes were worn but clean. Her hair was pulled back quickly, like someone who didn't have time to care how it looked. In her hands, she held a small photo, pressing it against the gravestone like it might sink into it. "I told you I would come," she said, her voice breaking. "I just needed to finish work first." The man frowned slightly. The words felt sharp against his chest. Finish work first. He had said the same thing once. She bowed her head and stayed that way for a long time. No movement. Just stillness and quiet tears. He shifted uncomfortably, feeling like a witness to something deeply private. Part of him wanted to leave, to give her space. Another part felt rooted to the ground, unable to walk away. For the first time in years, he realized something clearly. Grief did not care how much money you had. It did not measure pain by bank accounts or status. It found everyone the same way. The woman finally stood up, using the tree to steady herself. She wiped her face again and took a deep breath, as if trying to reset herself before returning to the world. Outside these gates, she turned slightly and noticed him then. Their eyes met. There was an instant of awkwardness. The unspoken understanding that both were standing in a place where words often failed. She nodded politely, unsure whether to say something. He gave a small nod in return. Neither smiled. He looked back at the grave in front of him, then at hers. They were not close together, but close enough to feel connected by the same quiet sorrow. He stood up slowly, brushing grass from his coat. For a moment, he considered leaving, but his feet did not move. Instead, he walked a few steps toward the path between them and stopped. "Hard mornings," he said gently, keeping his voice low. She hesitated, then nodded. "Some days are worse than others." He did not ask questions. He did not offer comfort words that sounded empty. He simply stood there, sharing the space. Minutes passed like that. Just two strangers surrounded by stones and names and memories. In that moment, stripped of titles and riches, he was not a billionaire. He was just a man trying to breathe through loss. And she was not just a struggling mother. She was someone who loved deeply and had paid the highest price for it. Neither of them knew that this quiet moment, born from pain, was about to change both of their lives. Not through miracles. Not through dramatic promises, but through something far more powerful. Understanding, the man did not leave right away. He stayed standing near the path, hands in his coat pockets. Watching the woman pick up a small bag that had been resting beside the grave, she moved slowly, like each step required effort. When she turned to walk away, she paused again, looking back at the stone one last time, as if trying to memorize it. He understood that pause better than he wanted to. It was the silent argument between the heart and the truth. The heart saying, "Stay a little longer." The truth saying, "Nothing will change." She wiped her face and finally stepped onto the path. They began walking in the same direction, not planned, not spoken, just the natural way the path led. For a few moments, the only sound was their footsteps on the ground and the distant rustle of leaves. "I don't usually come this early," she said suddenly, her voice soft but steady. "But I couldn't sleep." He nodded. "Early mornings feel honest," he replied. "There's less noise." She gave a faint smile, the kind that didn't quite reach the eyes. "Yes," she said. "Before the day tells you what you're supposed to be strong about." That surprised him. He looked at her, really looked, and saw lines on her face that were not from age but from responsibility. From holding things together even when they were breaking. They walked a little farther. "I come here when I feel like I'm forgetting," continued. "Not the person. Just the sound of the voice. The small things." He felt his chest tighten. "I'm afraid of that too," he admitted. He hadn't planned to say it, but it came out on its own. "I don't want time to smooth things out too much." She stopped near a bench and sat down, resting the bag at her feet. He hesitated, then sat at the other end, leaving space between them. Neither seemed in a hurry to go anywhere else. She stared ahead. "People tell you it gets easier," she said. "I think you just carry it better." He let out a quiet breath. "That's exactly it." For a while, they sat without speaking. Birds called somewhere in the distance. A gardener pushed a cart slowly along another path, nodding politely as he passed. The woman reached into her bag and pulled out the photo again. This time she did not cry. She just looked at it. "I talk too much when I'm nervous," she said, almost apologetically. He shook his head. "You aren't bothering me." She nodded, accepting that. "I work 2 jobs," she said. "Morning cleaning offices, evenings at a small shop. I bring my other child with me when I can. I don't like leaving them alone too long." He listened closely, not interrupting. I always tell myself to be grateful, she went on. We have food. We have a roof. Some people have it worse. But then I come here, and none of that matters. I just miss my child. Her voice cracked at the last word, and she pressed her lips together. Breathing through it, he stared at the ground for a second, then said quietly, I lost someone too. She looked at him then, really looked. I'm sorry, she said, and there was no surprise in her voice. It's only understanding. I used to think being busy was the same as being present, he continued. I thought providing was enough. I learned the hard way that it isn't. She nodded slowly. Everyone thinks they have more time. They shared a silence that felt heavy, but honest. After a moment, she stood up. I should go, she said. The bus gets crowded later. He stood as well. Yes, he replied. Thank you for talking. She gave a small smile, this time a little warmer. Thank you for listening. They walked toward the gate together. Just before they reached it, a man in a dark suit hurried toward them. Phone pressed to his ear. There you are, the man said, sounding relieved. We've been trying to reach you. The woman stepped back slightly, confused. The man with the phone lowered it and spoke in a respectful tone. The board meeting has been moved. Your presence is required. The woman's eyes widened as realization slowly settled in. She looked from the suited man to the quiet stranger she'd been speaking with. Oh, she said softly. The billionaire felt the shift instantly. Please, he said gently. It doesn't change anything. She looked embarrassed. I didn't know, she said. I didn't mean to. I know, he interrupted. And I'm glad you didn't. The suited man waited, clearly uncomfortable. The woman adjusted her bag strap. I should go, she repeated. He nodded. I hope your day is kind to you. She paused, then said, I hope you find peace too. She turned and walked away toward the bus stop outside the gates, shoulders squared again, ready to face the rest of her day. He watched her leave, something shifting quietly inside him. For the first time in a long while, he felt that his pain had been seen, not measured, not judged, just acknowledged. And he realized hers had been too. He turned back once more toward the rows of stones, then followed his assistant out. But the cemetery did not release him so easily. All day long, her words stayed with him, about carrying grief, about pretending strength, about missing the small things. In his office later that evening, surrounded by glass walls and quiet floors, he pulled up meetings and numbers and reports. None of them held his attention. Instead, he found himself staring out the window, thinking of a tired woman with worn clothes in a photo held close to her heart. He wondered if she had enough help, and for the first time in years, he wondered what his wealth could mean if it was guided by memory. Not ambition. Days passed, but the morning at the cemetery did not leave his mind. Meetings came and went. Cars picked him up. People greeted him with respect and careful distance. Everything looked the same on the outside, yet something inside him refused to settle. He found himself replaying small details. The way the woman held that photo, the tired strength in her voice, the simple truth in her words about carrying grief instead of escaping it. He had heard countless people speak confidently around him, but her quiet honesty stayed longer than any speech ever had. At night, sleep came late. When it did, it was light and broken. He would wake up before sunrise, the room still dark, thoughts already loud in his mind. He started walking more, choosing empty streets instead of waiting for drivers. He needed silence, the kind that let him think without pressure. He realized something uncomfortable. He had built his life so carefully that pain had no place to rest. When loss came, he locked it away and kept moving. Success gave him excuses, applause gave him cover, but silence at the cemetery had taken all of that away. Meanwhile, the woman's life did not slow down. It never did. The next morning after the cemetery, she woke before her alarm. The room was small, and the air smelled faintly of cleaning soap from the night before. She sat on the edge of the bed, listening to the quiet, making sure the rest of the house was still asleep. Moments like this were fragile. She learned not to break them too quickly. She got ready and prepared breakfast with careful movements. There was another child to send to school, another shift waiting. Grief had to fit into the spaces left over. As she walked to work, her thoughts returned to the man she had met. Not because of who he was, but because of how he listened. Most people avoided grief or rushed past it with advice. He had stayed still with it. She did not tell anyone about the meeting. Not her coworkers. Not her family. It felt private, like something fragile that needed to stay untouched for a while. Later that week, as she finished her evening shift, a supervisor handed her a small envelope. "Someone asked me to give you this," he said, shrugging. She frowned slightly and waited until she was outside before opening it. Inside was a short note. No fancy words. Just a few lines thanking her for the conversation and wishing her strength. At the bottom was a phone number. No name. She stood under the building's light for a long moment, reading it again. Her first instinct was to fold it up and put it away. She didn't want complications. She didn't want misunderstandings, but curiosity, quiet and harmless, pulled at her. She slipped the note into her bag. That night, she stared at the ceiling long after everything was quiet. In the end, she did nothing. Some connections did not need action right away. Back in his world, the billionaire sat through another long meeting. Voices blended together. Numbers flashed on screens. Suddenly, he caught himself thinking about the envelope he had sent. He wondered if it had reached her, or if it would be ignored. For once, he was fine with either outcome. The following weekend, he found himself returning to the cemetery. Not for a special date. Not out of habit. He just needed to be there. She arrived later than usual, surprised to see him standing near the same path. This time, they recognized each other instantly. "Hello?" he said. "Hello?" he replied. They did not ask why the other was there. They both already knew. They walked slowly along the paths, stopping near a quiet corner where benches sat under shade. This time, the silence felt easier to share. "I received your note," she said eventually. He nodded. "I wasn't sure if it was the right thing to do. It was kind," she said. "I don't get many notes like that." They sat down. "I keep thinking about something you said," he admitted. "About pretending to be strong because the day expects it." "Yes. Some days the pretending is heavier than the work." He looked down at his hands. "I've spent my life avoiding that weight." She studied him with quiet curiosity. "You don't look like someone who avoids much." He breathed out slowly. "I avoid what can't be fixed." Her face softened. "None of this can be fixed," she said gently. "Only understood." Those words sat between them. They talked longer this time. About small things. About favorite sounds. About memories that hurt and memories that comforted. They did not share details they weren't ready to give. Before leaving, he took a chance. "If you ever need help," he said carefully, "not money. Just support. Please reach out." She considered it, then nodded once. "Thank you." As they walked away in different directions, both felt the quiet shift of something beginning. Not rescue. Not romance. Something steadier. Trust neither knew where it would lead, but both knew it mattered. And for two people carrying separate griefs. That was enough for now. After their second meeting at the cemetery, life seemed to move faster for both of them. Not because anything dramatic happened, but because something inside had shifted. And shifts like that make ordinary days feel heavier and clearer at the same time. For the man, work no longer felt neutral. Meetings that once energized him now blurred together. He noticed how often people around him spoke without truly listening, how easily pain was turned into numbers and timelines. He found himself leaving early more often, choosing quiet over celebration. At night, he began sorting through old things. Boxes that had not been opened in years. Clothes folded neatly but never worn again. Papers filled with ideas that once felt urgent and now felt empty. In one box, he found a small item that made him sit down on the floor and stay there longer than he planned. His chest tightened, but he did not push it away this time. He stayed with the feeling. He thought about the woman often, not in a restless way, but as a reminder. She had not asked anything of him. That made the connection feel honest. And honesty was something he realized he missed. For her, The days were still full and demanding. Work began before the sun and ended long after it should. She learned to stretch meals, stretch patience, stretch strength. Some nights she fell asleep sitting up, shoes still on, exhaustion winning before tears could start. But there was a small difference now. She felt less invisible. It came in quiet moments. While waiting for the bus, while washing dishes, while walking past the cemetery fence after work, knowing someone had truly seen her pain without trying to fix it made the wait feel slightly more balanced. One afternoon, her supervisor stopped her again. This time, there was no envelope. Just a message. Someone had asked if she was available for a short conversation, no obligation, at a nearby cafe. Transportation would be covered. The tone was respectful, careful. Her first reaction was fear, then suspicion. She had learned to protect herself. That night she thought about it long after the house was quiet. In the end, she decided there was no harm in listening. The cafe was small and quiet, out tucked between shops that most people passed without noticing. When she arrived, she spotted him immediately, seated near the window. He stood when he saw her, greeting her with the same calm presence he had shown before. "Thank you for coming," he said. She nodded and sat down. "You wanted to talk?" "Yes," he replied. "But only if you're comfortable." She waited. He folded his hands together carefully. "I've been thinking a lot about responsibility," he said. "Not the public kind. The personal kind." She listened. "I don't want to interfere in your life," he continued. "I don't believe in saving people, but I do believe in support. If there's any practical way I can help childcare, education, healthcare, I want it to be done quietly and with respect." "Act." She stared into her cup. The steam rose slowly, like time stretching. "I don't want charity," she said. "I wouldn't offer it," he replied. "Only partnership." That word changed something. Tears reached her eyes, but she blinked them back. "I don't know how to accept things," she admitted. "I've learned to manage alone," he nodded. "Accepting help can feel like loss of control." "I know that." They talked for a long time. About boundaries. About dignity. About trust. No behavior felt rushed. No promises felt exaggerated. In the end, she agreed to something small. Just assistance with schooling costs. Nothing more. Something that let her breathe without feeling owned. When they parted, there was no handshake. Just a quiet understanding. In the weeks that followed, change came gently. Bills felt less frightening. Time felt slightly kinder. She was still tired, still grieving, still strong but less stretched thin. For him. Watching the impact without being seen by the world felt grounding. He did not take credit. He did not announce it. He simply allowed it. One evening, he returned to the cemetery again. As he stood there, he realized something new. His grief no longer felt like a wound he needed to hide. It felt like a teacher. Nearby, the woman stood at her own place of memory. She noticed him and gave a small nod. He returned it. They did not walk together this time. They did not speak. They didn't need to. The space between them was no longer filled with pain alone, but with purpose, and both knew that whatever came next would be built slowly, carefully, and truthfully. Time did not heal everything, but it softened the hard edges. The seasons changed quietly. Cold mornings turned mild. Trees that once stood bare filled slowly with leaves. The cemetery looked different with color in the air, but the feeling of the place stayed the same, respectful, honest. Still, the woman continued her life much as before. She woke early, worked hard, and returned home tired. But there was a change that could not be missed. The constant fear of falling behind no longer sat in her chest every moment of the day. She had room to breathe. Her child noticed it first. "You smile more?" the child said one evening while they were eating together. She paused, surprised, then smiled for real. "Maybe I do," she answered. School became less stressful. She stopped counting every single coin in her mind. She was still careful, still responsible, but not constantly afraid. Most important, she had time to listen, time to sit quietly, time to remember without breaking. she still went to the cemetery. Not every week now. Just when she felt the pull. Standing there no longer felt like reopening a wound. It felt like visiting a place where love rested. For the man, life changed in a quieter but deeper way. He stepped back from work more than anyone expected. Things did not fall apart like people warned. They adjusted. He began funding projects he never would have noticed before. Small community programs. Support spaces for families dealing with loss. Nothing carried his name. That was important to him. People around him noticed something different too. He spoke less, listened more. When someone talked about struggle, he did not rush to end the discomfort. He stayed present. One afternoon, he found himself seated on a familiar bench at the cemetery. He hadn't planned the visit. He simply needed grounding. The woman arrived later, walking slowly as always. This time she approached him first. "I wanted to say something," she said. He looked up. "Of course." She sat nearby. "You changed things for my family," she said carefully. "Not just financially. You've changed how I see help and how I see myself." He listened. "I didn't lose my strength," she continued. "I learned I didn't have to carry everything alone." His eyes filled quietly. "You helped me too," he admitted. "More than you know." They sat together as the wind moved through the trees. "I think people believe grief ends," she said, "but it becomes part of who you are." "Yes," he replied, "and sometimes it guides you where success never could." As the sun lowered, they stood and walked their separate paths once more. No promises. No expectations. Just understanding. Weeks later, a small gathering took place near the edge of the cemetery grounds. It was simple. A bench was placed beneath a tree with a small plaque that spoke about memory, kindness, and listening. No names, no titles. The woman stood near it quietly. The man stood farther back, watching families pass, some grieving, some simply resting. That bench became a place where people paused, sometimes to cry, sometimes to breathe, sometimes to feel less alone. Neither of them claimed it. Life continued. The woman watched her child grow with laughter, slowly returning to their home. She still carried her loss, but it no longer defined every step. The man returned to the cemetery often, not only for the past, but for perspective. Two lives that should never have crossed, had changed each other without noise or spectacle. No headlines told the story, but in quiet moments. Real ones do not need an audience. At the cemetery, where pain first collided, healing had found its way in, not loudly, not suddenly, but honestly, and that was enough. Life did not stop after understanding was found. It rarely does. It simply continues, testing whether the lessons learned will be remembered when things become ordinary again. For the woman, ordinary days were still full. Mornings still began early. Shoes were still worn thin. Some nights were still quiet in ways that hurt. But something inside her had changed shape. Grief was no longer an open ache. It had settled into something deeper. Something that lived alongside love instead of replacing it. One afternoon, while waiting outside a school gate, she noticed another parent crying softly. No one else seemed to see. For a moment, the woman hesitated. She understood that look too wealthy, need to be invisible while falling apart. She walked over and stood nearby, not speaking right away. "Some days are harder," she said gently. The stranger nodded. Surprise, relief flashing briefly across their face. The woman realized then that pain, once understood, gives people a quiet ability to notice others. And sometimes that noticing is enough. Her life slowly expanded in small but meaningful ways. She volunteered when she could. She helped other parents with forms they didn't understand. She listened more than she spoke. None of it felt heroic. It felt natural. At home, laughter returned more often. Not loud laughter, not careless. Just small moments that reminded her life was still moving forward. The man watched his own world shift as well. He no longer rushed through days like they were obstacles. He learned to sit with people without distraction. He started asking questions without already planning answers. His wealth still existed, but it no longer defined his sense of purpose. Some of his colleagues quietly noticed the changes. He no longer chased expansion for its own sake. He talked about sustainability with people, with lives, with meaning. One evening, he stood before a mirror and realized something that surprised him. He felt lighter. Not because grief had left, because he was no longer fighting it. The cemetery remained a constant. Some days they visited at the same time. Other days, they didn't. Sometimes they spoke briefly. Sometimes they only exchanged a nod. There was no pressure to perform a role in each other's lives. That freedom mattered. One quiet morning, he brought a notebook with him and sat on the bench beneath the tree. He began writing, not plans or numbers, but thoughts, memories, regrets, gratitude. He wrote until his hand ached. Nearby, the woman watched him from a distance before approaching. "You write now?" she asked. "It helps me listen to myself," he replied. She nodded. "I used to think silence was empty. Now I think it's just honest." They shared that moment without rushing it. Later that week, she received news that changed her routine again. A chance for better work hours. Nothing dramatic. Just something that allowed more evenings at home. She smiled when she realized what mattered most to her now was not money, but presence. On a cool afternoon, the bench beneath the tree was occupied by strangers. An older couple sat holding hands. A young person stared quietly at the ground. The woman stood nearby, watching. "This place. It helps people," she said. "Yes," the man replied. "Because it doesn't demand anything." They stayed a while, then left separately again. As months passed, the story of what had happened between them never became public. That was important to both of them. Some things lose meaning when turned into spectacle, but the impact continued quietly. More support spaces were created. More families felt seen. More conversations slowed down long enough for honesty, and often, without realizing it, both of them returned to the same truth. Pain, when shared without fear, does not weaken people. It connects them at the cemetery. Where their lives had first crossed, nothing dramatic ever happened again. And somehow, that made all the difference. Nothing in their lives returned to the way it had been before. But nothing turned into something unbelievable either. The changes were quiet, steady, and real. The kind that only shows itself when you pay close attention. For the woman, time began to feel different. It no longer rushed past her like something she had to chase. Some mornings, she sat by the window with a cup in her hands and allowed herself to think, not about tasks, not about money, just about memories. She noticed she could now remember without pain taking over her breath. Sadness still came, but it no longer demanded everything. It shared space with gratitude. At school events and work shifts, other parents began talking to her more. They trusted her. They told her things they didn't tell others. She never gave advice unless asked. Mostly, she listened. One evening, a woman broke down in front of her over a small mistake at work. Embarrassed tears quickly wiped away. "It's okay," she said softly. "Some days your heart is already tired before the work starts." The woman nodded, relieved to be understood. Moments like that quietly became part of her life. She didn't announce herself as strong. Strength simply showed up when needed. For the man, distance from noise became a habit. He reduced public appearances not out of fear, but clarity. He learned which meetings could be handled without him, and which moments couldn't. He began visiting places he funded, not as an observer, but as someone willing to sit and hear stories. When people talked, he paid full attention. He no longer looked past them toward outcomes. People noticed. Some questioned the change. Others respected it. Late one night, he stood alone in his office. City lights spread below like scattered thoughts. He realized how little those lights comforted him now, meaning lived. Elsewhere, the cemetery remained the quiet meeting point of truth. Some days he went alone. Some days the woman was there too. Their conversations became fewer but deeper. One afternoon, she said something that stayed with him. "I think pain makes us honest," she said. "And honesty makes us careful with others." He nodded. I spent years being careful with numbers and careless with time. She smiled gently. You're learning now. They sat without speaking afterward, letting that truth rest as months passed. The bench under the tree became worn in small ways, not damaged, simply used. People leaned back. People rested hands on the wood. People stayed longer than expected. One day a handwritten note was left there by a stranger. Thank you for this place. I didn't know where else to sit. The woman found it first and showed it to him later. He read it quietly and folded it with care. This is enough, he said. Yes, she agreed. At home, life continued growing. Her child began talking about the future again. Small dreams at first, then bigger ones. She listened, heartful. No longer afraid to imagine forward. The man also allowed himself to imagine differently. Not retirement. Not escape. Just balance. One morning, he skipped a major event and returned to the cemetery instead. He stood still, hands relaxed at his sides. I remember now, he said softly to the stone before him. I won't forget again. The wind moved gently, carrying the scent of leaves. Years from now, people would never connect their stories. They would never know how strangers changed direction because of one honest morning. There would be no interviews, no speeches, no credit. But somewhere, a tired parent would sit on a bench and feel less alone. Somewhere, a grieving person would breathe more easily, and somewhere inside, two ordinary lives touched by loss. Peace would continue to grow, quietly, steadily, like something real. Time has a strange way of proving what truly lasts. The cemetery stayed the same on the surface. The paths were trimmed. The stones were steady. The bench beneath the tree remained where it had always been. But the people who passed through it changed, and the meaning of the place deepened with each quiet visit. Years had passed since that first morning, when two strangers had stood close enough to feel each other's grief. Life had moved forward, not in a straight line, but in careful steps. The woman grew steadier in ways that surprised even her. She was still working, still busy, still tired some nights, but there was a calm strength in her now. People noticed it. Neighbors asked for her opinion. Teachers trusted her voice. She never saw herself as important, but others did. She learned how to say no without guilt. She learned how to rest without fear. She learned that remembering did not mean reopening old wounds. It meant honoring love. At home, laughter became clearer. Her child grew taller, more curious, more confident. Questions about the past still came, but they were softer now. Do you think they're proud of us? The child asked one evening. She did not hesitate. I know they are, she said. And she believed it. The man aged in quieter ways too. Not just lines on his face, but depth in his presence. He simplified his life in ways his younger self never would have understood. Fewer possessions, fewer distractions, more intention. He stepped away from projects that demanded too much noise and leaned into efforts that helped people stand again on their own feet. He stopped measuring success by growth and started measuring it by relief. Sometimes, people asked him why he changed. He would say, I learned how to listen. The cemetery remained a place they both returned to, separately and sometimes together. Their conversations became rare but meaningful. There was no expectation to update each other. No keeping score of time. One afternoon, as they sat on opposite ends of the bench beneath the tree, he said something unexpected. I used to be afraid that if I slowed down, I would disappear, he said. She watched the leaves move above them. And now I know I was disappearing when I didn't slow down. She nodded. I figured that out the day I stopped pretending I was fine. They shared a small smile. As the years went by, the bench became known in ways that were never planned. Not through signs or announcements. Through stories passed quietly from one person to another. There were days when 3 or 4 strangers would be sitting near it, each lost in their own thoughts, connected by nothing but the need for stillness. Sometimes, the woman would notice someone sitting there too long and gently ask, Would you like some company? Sometimes they would answer. Sometimes they wouldn't. Both responses were respected. The man noticed younger people coming more often. Students, new parents, people carrying fears they hadn't yet put into words. He saw himself in them. One rainy afternoon, he returned alone. Water clung to his coat, darkening the fabric. He stood by the bench and touched the wood lightly. "This place outlived my plans," he whispered, and that felt right. The woman's life continued to open in practical ways too. Better work hours became steadier work. A small apartment upgrade gave her more light and more quiet. But the biggest change was internal. She trusted herself. She trusted that life could hold joy again without betrayal. That moving forward did not mean leaving anyone behind. One day, she brought her child to the bench. "This is a place where people remember," she said. The child sat quietly. "It feels peaceful," they said. "Yes," she replied, "because no one is pretending here." The man arrived later that day and saw them there. He did not interrupt. He watched from a distance, heart steady, in that moment. He understood something fully. Legacy was not about buildings or numbers. It was about moments that continued without you needing to guide them. As time passed, both of them faced new losses, new challenges. Grief did not stop visiting. It simply arrived differently, but now they knew how to stand with it instead of against it. On an unusually warm evening, they walked the path together one last time. "I don't come as often now," she said. "Neither do I," he replied. "That means we're living," she said softly. He agreed. They reached the gate and paused. This time, they did not promise to meet again. They did not exchange anything symbolic. They had already given each other enough. Years later, people would still sit on that bench. They would cry there, breathe there, heal there, and they would never know the full story, but they wouldn't need to, because what remained was simple: a place where pain first met. Understanding, a reminder that even brief connections can change direction, and proof that real life does not need drama to be powerful. It only needs truth.